Welcome to the Theology Made podcast. I'm Jordan. In today's episode, we're going to look at the theologian who tried to explain everything and then stopped. Can you picture yourself spending 40 years building the most ambitious intellectual structure in human history? A system, a single unified framework that could explain God, creation, morality, salvation, angels, evil, the human soul, all interlocking, all coherent, all airtight. And then one morning, you put down your pen. Not because you finished or because you're just tired of it all, but because something happened. Something you saw or felt or just couldn't explain. And afterward, everything you'd written felt thin. Like you spent 40 years carefully describing the surface of a lake, and then someone pulled you underwater. That's where we're starting today. The year is 1273, Naples, Italy. A Dominican friar is in the middle of writing what will become one of the most influential books in the history of Western civilization. He's been working on it for 7 years. Thousands of pages, hundreds of questions posed, answered, and defended with surgical-like precision. He writes, honestly, the way some people breathe. Constantly, compulsively, like the work is keeping him alive. His secretary struggled to keep up. By some accounts, he dictated to multiple scribes simultaneously, switching between topics mid-sentence, moving from philosophy to theology to metaphysics without losing the thread. People who knew him described a kind of intellectual trance. Like he wasn't composing exactly, but receiving, pulling ideas down from somewhere and then just putting them in order. So he's 48 years old. In medieval terms, that's not young, but the project he'd undertaken wasn't something you'd finish young. It was the kind of work a person only attempted if they genuinely believe it's possible, if they believe that reason applied with enough rigor and enough humility can map the architecture of reality itself. This man, his name, Thomas Aquinas. And he had spent his entire adult life trying to prove that God made sense. To understand what Aquinas was attempting, you need to understand the world he walked into. It's the 13th century and the Catholic Church is having a crisis it doesn't quite have a name for yet. Aristotle is back. Aristotle's work had been largely lost to Western Europe for centuries, preserved instead by Islamic scholars in the Arab world, who had been translating and building on it for generations. And then through a complicated chain of cultural contact, trade routes, the Crusades, centers of learning in Spain and Sicily, Aristotelian philosophy, it flooded itself back into Europe, and it was causing problems. Because Aristotle's good. His logic is tight. His observations about the natural world are pretty sharp. His framework for understanding cause and effect, matter and form, purpose and motion, it's sophisticated, and it doesn't obviously need God. So for a lot of churchmen, a lot of theologians, this was very alarming. Aristotle felt like a rival, like a competing system. If you could explain the world without appealing to divine revelation, what do you need revelation for? But Aquinas looked at that anxiety and had a different reaction. He thought, what if they're not rivals? What if faith can use reason as a tool? And if parts of philosophy turn out to be true, isn't that useful? And that's the premise he built everything on. That truth is truth. Then if something is really true, provable, demonstratable, true through careful reasoning, then it can't actually contradict what God revealed. Because God made reason and God gave revelation, and God, well, he doesn't contradict himself. And if they appear to conflict, either the reasoning is wrong or the interpretation is wrong, but they can't both be right and also oppose each other. Now, today that sounds obvious to a lot of us. At the time, it was a profound intellectual commitment, and it set him on a project that would consume the rest of his life, the Summa Theologiae. His masterwork is structured like a legal document crossed with a philosophical debate. Every question is posed, every possible objection is raised, and then every objection is answered. Every conclusion is defended. Then you move to the next question. Can we know anything about God through reason alone? Question posed, objections considered, answers given. Does God exist? Same process. He produced 5 proofs, not like 5 guesses, 5 independent logical arguments, each approaching the same conclusion from a different angle, like triangulating a location. Does God have a body? Does God change? Does God know individual things or only universals? Is evil real? And if so, where does it come from? Each question gets the same treatment, the same disciplined, systematic attention, the same confidence that if you think carefully enough and honestly enough, you can get to the truth. And reading the Summa today, it's a strange experience. It is thorough in a way that almost feels aggressive. Like the author is determined he's not going to leave any corner unexplored, any question unasked, any objection unanswered. It's like he knew someday there would be YouTube comments and Reddit threads. And the implicit message on every page is, I have thought about this harder than you have, and here's what I found. And the remarkable thing, truly, he's mostly right. Philosophers and theologians still argue with Aquinas, still wrestle with his conclusions, still find things to push back on, but they push back by engaging his arguments, because the arguments are real. They hold weight. You can't dismiss them. You have to answer them. And for 7 centuries, the Catholic Church essentially made his work, like the philosophical and theological systems he built, its official intellectual tradition. And that's not an accident. And that's a man who built something lasting, which is what makes December 6, 1273, so strange. Aquinas is saying Mass in Naples. It's the feast of St. Nicholas, an ordinary liturgical morning. Nothing unusual about the day, nothing recorded about the circumstances. He celebrates Mass, but then something happens, and we don't exactly know what. Aquinas never described it in detail. He said it was a revelation, something he received, something he experienced. Those close to him noticed immediately that he was different afterward. He was quieter, changed in some ways that they couldn't quite name. And then he stopped writing. Not a pause, not a break to collect his thoughts, not a vacation. He stopped. The Summa Theologiae was left unfinished, in the middle of the third part, in the middle of a section on the sacraments, mid-project, mid-argument. His secretary, Reginald, begged him to continue. The work was so close to done. They were so far along. Whatever had happened, surely he could push through it. And Aquinas' response is one of those statements that I think still haunts theologians. I cannot, he said. Everything I've written seems like straw to me compared to what I have seen and what has been revealed to me. Straw. Not incomplete, not a good first attempt that needs revision. Straw. Now, there are 2 easy ways to read that, and both of them, I think, miss the point. The first reading is that, Aquinas had a psychological break. He was 50. He'd been working himself to exhaustion for decades, and something in him just gave out. The mystical experience is the kind of language a medieval friar uses to describe a mental collapse. But he burned out. Maybe. But that reading requires you to believe that a man who spent his entire career arguing for the coherence of reason, the trustworthiness of careful thought, suddenly abandoned both for feelings. And more importantly, it doesn't actually account for what he said. He didn't say, I can't do this anymore. He said, everything I wrote seems like straw compared to what I've seen. That's not exhaustion, that's a comparison. The second reading, he experienced God directly and realized theology is pointless. Reason doesn't work, faith is irrational, burn the books. But he didn't say that either. He never repudiated the Summa. He didn't instruct anyone to destroy it. He didn't publicly recant of any arguments. His written work continued to circulate and be taught with his apparent blessing. The harder reading, the one that actually takes him seriously, is this. He discovered there was a difference between knowing about something and knowing it. And once he experienced the second kind, the first kind felt thin. Not wrong, not useless, just insufficient in a way he hadn't previously understood. And we live in a culture that has made an almost religious commitment to something being explained. If you can't explain it, you don't really understand it. If you understand it, you can describe it. If you can describe it, you can measure it. If you can measure it, you can replicate it. That's the sequence we've trusted for 300 years, and it's given us antibiotics, smartphones, and the ability to predict where a storm will be in 72 hours. And it works for a lot of things, sure. But there's an assumption there. The assumption is that the map and the territory are the same thing. That understanding about something is the same as understanding it. That if your explanation is good enough, precise enough, thorough enough, you've arrived. Aquinas built the best possible map. He gave us a theology with the resolution of a satellite image. And then he went somewhere the map couldn't follow. He didn't doubt what he wrote, but he saw beyond it. There's a concept in philosophy called the explanatory gap. It usually comes up in discussions about consciousness, the uncomfortable fact that no matter how precisely you describe what happens in the brain during an experience, you haven't actually described the experience. You've described the mechanism, the event itself, what it's like to see red, to feel pain, to taste coffee. That resists capture. You can get closer and closer, but the gap doesn't close. And Aquinas stumbled into almost like the theological version of that problem. He had narrowed the gap between the human mind and divine reality as far as language and logic could take him. And then he discovered what remained, the last unbridgeable distance. It wasn't something that waited to be explained. It was something that arrived. Reason can take you far. It just can't take you all the way. And there's a version of religious life, maybe you've encountered it, where faith functions like a completed file. You believe the right things, you read the right arguments, you can defend the positions, the system's in place. And because the system is in place, you're done. You've handled God. Aquinas spent decades building exactly that system. And at the end, he found something the system couldn't contain. And that's what we're sitting with. We're not short on explanations. We have more access to theological content, biblical commentary, apologetics, church history, and philosophical arguments more than any generation before us. If information were the goal, we've crossed the finish line by now, probably twice. We have podcasts and courses and annotated Bibles and frameworks for frameworks over frameworks. And yet, there's a particular kind of restlessness that none of it quite resolves. The sense that you've understood a great deal, and something essential remains just out of reach. Not because the explanations are bad, because explanation and encounter are two different things. And you can spend a long time chasing one while thinking you're doing the other. The problem isn't that we think too much. It's that we stop when we think we've arrived. Aquinas died 3 months after he stopped writing. He never finished the Summa. A student later added a supplement compiled from Aquinas' early works to complete the structure. But what Aquinas himself left is an unfinished architecture. Towers and walls, intricate vaulting, and then an open sky where the roof was supposed to be. Maybe that's not a failure. Maybe the open sky is the point. One of the greatest intellectual projects in human history, if not the greatest, ended not with a conclusion, but with a silence. The man who had built a system to explain everything put down his pen because something exceeded the system, and he didn't try to explain that either. If the most rigorous theological mind in Western history reached the edge of what reason could hold, and found that edge was not the end but a beginning, then the question isn't whether we've understood enough. The question is whether we've stayed curious long enough to find out what understanding can't reach. Hey, this is the Theology Made podcast. If this episode made you think, share it with someone who's still asking the questions. We'll see you next time.